IPO'd recently, so it turns out to be an effective strategy. And around early 2018 or late 2017, when I started being involved in this stuff, the advertising product was continuing to grow, and yet the campaigns for advertising product were all still defined in a single shard, which clearly wasn't going to work in the long term. In terms of our starting point, the problem we were looking at, we had multiple different services written in multiple different languages, owned by multiple different teams, all talking to this shard, using all the MySQL-y stuff, your joins, your transactions, your counts and stuff. It was very relational. We were using auto-increment to allocate a lot of IDs, which were globally unique. And so people were like, oh, I can just find a campaign by its ID. We wanted to shard by advertiser ID, but not all requests included advertiser ID. And we also noticed that the amount of data in a given advertiser continued to increase over time. It wasn't like we could just put new advertisers in a new shard. The existing ones would accumulate more and more data. So if we left them alone, eventually that shard would grow. So where do we go from there? What kind of solution would we want? Ideally one which is safe, something we can understand, something that we can test, roll out incrementally. If you don't like it, maybe you can change your mind, go backwards. It should be realistic. It shouldn't be a pipe dream. And bonus points if it's actually a real solution and not just runway. There's a lot of things you can do to buy time, and then you leave the project and a year later someone else has to solve the same problem in a similar way. And you didn't want to do that. And super bonus points if it's not overly fitted to the problem at hand. So we didn't necessarily just want to solve it for this one problem, but it'd be great if we could do something that Pinterest could reuse for other cases in the future. Now, I don't have a lot of time to get into the why. I think you have a why of your own. Long story short, we looked at a bunch of stuff. It turned out Vitess and others didn't, and not for lack of trying. So around January of 2018, you can see I joined the Slack challenge. He was super friendly. Look at that guy. As we learned about Vitess, as some people have noticed, the documentation, it can be hard to get into. There's a lot to know, a lot to learn. Running the unit tests and integration tests for our own software pointed at VD Combo and pointed at Vitess were one of the most useful things in just getting started. Just try it. Just a little aside here, we didn't know what production would look like at the beginning, but what it turned out to look like is that we used the MySQL protocol for VD8, not the gRPC protocol. It was just simpler that way, and it helped with this incremental thing where we wanted to be able to roll forward, roll back, on traffic. There are some downsides to the MySQL protocol. We aspire one day to be on gRPC. We ended up using Amazon Elastic Load Balancer to help direct traffic to the VD gates. It's not great, but it worked for us. We used separate ones for the master versus read-only, and also separate gates for master versus read-only. That's not how we started, but it's what we realized would actually avoid, hurting our master traffic too much. At Pinterest, we typically use Zookeeper. We were deploying tablets on top of existing MySQL hosts. We were not, deploying a new way of managing MySQL. We typically use OpenTSDB, so I contributed some code for that. And we build a fork of Vitess. We just have a Jenkins thing. It can be awkward to build Vitess, but we figured it out. Things we didn't change: how we allocate our MySQL servers. The MySQL team does it the same way. We didn't change how we do failover, aside from calling tablet externally reparented. We didn't change how we back up and restore. We didn't change how we do schema changes. At first, it wasn't super clear to us that we didn't have to change any of these things, but once we learned that we didn't have to change any of them, they made us happy because they weren't really in scope for our problem. So the first thing was just deploying an uncharted Vitess. Just how can we get this thing in production and before we reshard? And here, some of the things we ran into along the way might not have been things we totally anticipated. One is that, so OLTP versus OLAP. I don't know, how much people know about this, but there's some queries, it's the default mode, that have a lot of restrictions on how many results can be returned and things like that. And they're cool, they're nice restrictions, and today they're not entirely optional. It's on the list of things to do, but it's kind of a set of rules you have to follow that weren't totally related to the problem we wanted to solve, but they were there in front of us, because not all queries work in one or the other. vSchema management. Well, you know you need to have a vSchema, but how does it get there? How does it change? It's not super addressed today in a standard way. We turned out to have some code using named blocks. They're not supported. We turned out not to have everything in Unicode. We were not running in strict mode. We were using prepared statements and multi-statements, which turned out not to be supported at the time in the MySQL protocol. We noticed a save point being used, which wasn't supported in the MySQL protocol. And then, of course, we had to add our own the OpenTXDB stuff, and then also we have our own internal auth. So these first hurdles for launching Uncharted, what did we do? Well, for the OLTP thing, it was just kind of awkward. It was just pain. It was useful, but we went for all of our connections everywhere we connect to the database, and we classified it. Is this read committed? Is this a transaction? Is it repeatable read? Does this seem like something that should be fast, OLTP or OLAP? And then we had a bunch of whitelists and escape hatches in case we were wrong and we need to change our mind later. In retrospect, this was super useful. It makes our visibility better because now we separately monitor things that should be fast from things that should be slow, whereas before we didn't. But it was just kind of a hurdle to getting launched, and I hope in the future people don't have to do this. I think it's on the list. vSchema management, we made a tool we call it pin schema, which can look at our schema for the database and generate what the vSchema should look like. It's a sort of an item code, there's just an immediate mapping, so we can actually even alert if the vSchema in production doesn't look like it should based on the current schema. For name locks, we had to switch some of them to row locks instead. It's a little bit awkward to do, but very doable. You just have to move the Unicode. That one you won't get a warning about when you start a tablet. Strict mode, you'll notice immediately if you're not running in strict mode, and you might have to fix some queries. The tablet won't start. We decided to defer on prepared statements and multi-statements. Basically, so we just stopped using them, which had some performance costs. I think in the next slide I'll mention that a little bit more. The state point we had was totally pointless. We just got rid of it. It turned out implementing our custom auth was super easy. Like, did it in an afternoon, not knowing anything about auth in MySQL beforehand. Try implementing auth in actual MySQL in an afternoon, like a pluggable authentication module. Good luck with that. So then in terms of launching, how do we validate it? Well, the same unit test and integration tests we started running at the beginning, we continue to use those, all the way through. These are application level integration tests, not the Vitess ones. But on top of that, we did some dark reads where we had our applications send traffic both to the original MySQL, and we set up a whole shadow environment. So another master and a couple replicas with tablets. The reason we had a whole separate environment is just in case having a tablet, would potentially take down the MySQL server and how we configured it. We just wanted it totally isolated as much as possible. And the application would compare the difference. We also had some dark writes that I won't get into. They were super weird, but we happened to have the code lying around anyway. And we also replayed some writes from binlog. So basically, as transactions were recorded in MySQL, we have the queries and we have the rows changed in row-based replication format. So we actually replayed those against two MySQLs that had been restored at the same point in time. One through Vitess, one not, and then we use PT checksum to look at the tables and say, are they the same modulo, like a timestamp that might have been added during create, which won't be the same. Auto increment was a little awkward there because those weren't in SQL statements. We took them from the rows and put them in the statements, monitor can tell. And then at that point, we validated it. It worked. We weren't having any performance problems in our 100% dark reads. So we just kind of slowly, on percents of traffic, just kept pushing up until it was all there. So we had the go decision that we were going to go with Vitess to reshard with the database in June, and by August we productionized it, had monitoring and all that stuff, and had it running, and it was super smooth. Afterwards, we found that our visibility was better, and the OLTP thing actually helped a lot with that. But also, Vitess has cool stuff. There's other talks you might find out there on that. The server-side connection pools were pretty great. We actually found bugs when Vitess would warn about someone making a query that was incorrect, that turned out to really be incorrect, and somehow they ignored the error. Strict mode actually found some super weird queries that weren't wrong, but were crazy. We did notice greater variance in latency and greater latency, which for us wasn't a big deal. Our product is advertiser focused, or this was, and a lot of this seems fixable. I'm not worried about it. Part of it, we went through another two hops, right? The ELP and the VT8. Both of those in the long term could disappear. One of them could for sure disappear. We're moving towards Envoy as our service mesh. And not having multi-statement support, with connector J, it refused to do batch inserts, which slowed things down a lot, like your multi-value inserts. But that's supported now, so that's improved. And then over the holidays, code freezes don't break anything. Sarbanes-Oxley, the other kind of socks you can't wear. We were off doing other things until it was time for phase 2, actually resharding. So what did we need to do, right? We obviously needed primary and secondary indexes. We needed compatibility with our offline data warehouse stuff. And the main trick there was that as you're resharding your test, you might have shards that exist but are inactive. And to our MySQL team, they don't really care. There's you can have more MySQL instances that are all have the same permissions and stuff, but we cared. Some of them are real and some of them are fake, and we didn't want to double count data and stuff like that. Of course, auto increment doesn't work across shards. And then we had and still have foreign keys, which we probably shouldn't, but they're not officially supported, so we had to make some changes there. Primary indexes, I mean, you just gotta do it, right? We went to all our tables and made sure that the advertiser column was there. Secondary indexes, we did some weird stuff. So we knew that we would want lookup indexes, and we're actually working on that at the moment. But we took a shortcut, because when you have them lookup indexes like committed to a table somewhere, they could get out of sync, and you need tooling to like backfill them. And we didn't want to deal with that, so we made kind of a little special lookup index that instead of storing it on disk, we'll do a scatter for basically every query, but then cache the result. So the first one, will always be expensive, but subsequent ones will usually not be. And that's fine for us in a small number of shards, but we'll move towards lookup indexes over time. We also didn't want to go into every query and add the advertiser ID into the query to help V3 routing. So we modified MySQL to allow special comments, so we could say, oh, like, we know this relates to this advertiser, even though it's not in the query. I won't even talk about this other thing. Well, I will. So the other thing is secondary indexes can be used both to plan routes to know how a join can work, and then also to know what shard to direct it to. And we initially, as we were developing stuff, didn't have our secondary indexes in place. So I have a little hack that basically says, we know that all of our queries can happen in a single shard. We're not doing block nested loop joins across 2 shards to get an advertiser stuff. So like, don't do that in the planner. Just a little hack we had there, but we can get rid of it now actually. The data warehouse stuff, we just had to write the code. Like, auto increment, we use sequences in Vitess, roll them out table by table, but left the auto increment in the schema so we could roll it back at any time. Because again, we always wanted to be able to roll back. We never wanted to be in a state where we couldn't undo it. And foreign keys, if you want to know more, there's a bug there. It has some code that we've landed, some of which is open source, some of which is not. And how do we launch the resharding safely? Well, again, unit tests and integration tests are our greatest friends. We did a special kind of dark read, actually, where instead of from the application making 2 requests and comparing them, we did it at the VT gate level. So we had this shadow system again, and we sent requests there from the application and then ignored them, aside from checking if they returned that they happened. And then this shadow environment had a master and a read-only when they queries to both of them and compare them, but it was halfway through a resharding, basically. So it had vReplication running, and the read-onlys were split, and the master was not. So we'd compare those 2 results to make sure that the errors were consistent or the values were consistent. You get a small number of errors due to inconsistencies in time and stuff like that, but it was pretty accurate. And we did the same bin log replay, which now with sequences, we didn't have the auto increment problem. And then as we were getting ready to actually execute the resharding, we did a couple more things. One is in our newly created shards, we got rid of the auto increment from the schema. It was still in the original shard because even after we resharded, we could have within 10 minutes reverted to having Vitess totally off. We could have turned off sequences, we could have like unresharded. But we wanted to make sure that in the new shards, there was no way we would somehow accidentally invoke auto increment and assign the same ID twice. So our old one had it on and our new ones didn't. We put a brief moratorium on schema changes because we were relying on this reverse replication feature that Sugu added for our safety, and we're still using Pertona Online schema change, which is not compatible with vReplication. And then when it came time to do it, we did the migration. We waited 2 minutes. We unmigrated just to prove that we could, and it worked fine. And then we migrated forward again. And then like nothing broke. It was like super eerily quiet. It was almost weirdly but that was no big deal. We just resharted an important database. When we launched on Pi Day by random coincidence. Oh, yeah. I know, I guess if there's questions, we'll maybe do questions later. Come find me. But yeah, thanks for the test. It was very helpful.
Wow.